So how many of you are parents of preschool or elementary age? Raise your hand. Okay, a lot of you. Great, awesome. How about parents of middle school, high school? We've got a special prayer room set up for all of us who are parents of middle school, high school. How about parents of college and beyond? Okay, how about grandparents? Oh yeah, you're the ones that cheer when you raise your hands. The grandparents cheer. Okay, how about raise your hand if you care about this generation of young people? Yes, that's all of us. And I am eager to share with you this morning some brand new research. Like, I think this is maybe the 5th time that I've shared it. And I can already tell that you are the smartest group that I've so far shared it with. So I'm looking forward to unpacking it with you, and the godliest group so far that I've shared it with. So looking forward to journeying with you. And then tonight, we're going to get a little bit more into how does this research actually affect how we lead and love and serve the next generation. So we're going to talk about Gen Alpha teens. Now, maybe you heard about Gen Z. You probably have. Gen Alpha are the ones who are coming up on their heels. And I see a few of you already taking pictures. The good news is at the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you a QR code where you can get all the slides. So feel free to take photos. I sometimes do myself kind of as a backup, but you can get all the slides through that QR code. So we spent a lot of time at the Fuller Youth Institute with youth leaders. And as we were sharing some of our dreams of research with Gen Alpha, with a small group of youth leaders, one of them said, you know, I'm just getting my head around Gen Z, and now I'm supposed to be thinking about Gen Alpha. And he said, they kind of slid up on me. And that's what's happening with this Gen Alpha generation. They're already here. They are in our churches. They are in our communities. And I know because you are a group that cares about multiplication and seeing the next gen really be transformed, that you want to hear more about this next gen. So they are the iPad preschoolers, the Roblox builders, the AI natives, the aspiring K-pop demon hunters. How many of you have seen K-pop Demon Hunters? Okay, highly recommend it. If you want to get just a glimpse on this generation, it is worth the hour and a half to watch that movie. So who is Gen Alpha? What do we mean by Gen Alpha? Well, let me be more specific. This is those who were born 2010 and later. So roughly those who are 16 and under now. So think in your church about 16, 13, 9, 6, 1-year-olds, that's Gen Alpha. This is the first post-pandemic group of teenagers who've really been affected in some powerful ways, good and bad, by the pandemic. This is the most diverse generation that the U.S. has ever seen. And I was on your website earlier this morning just to make sure I understood all about this context, and I love your heart for racial justice and for racial reconciliation. According to census data, in the midst of everything else that happened in 2020, 2020 was a big and tough year for the U.S. In the midst of all that happened, we also crossed an important line in the U.S. that now half of those under 18 are young people of color. So this is the most ethnically and racially diverse generation that our nation has ever seen. Now, part of what we like doing as researchers is distilling a lot of complexity into simplicity. So thanks to a few grants from the Lilly Endowment, as well as Tyndale House Foundation, as well as other donors, we've been able to launch a 3-phase Gen Alpha research project. We are about 60% done. So the first phase was 3,000 surveys of 13 to 17-year-olds. So the oldest Gen Alpha, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on here. The second phase is we did 100 in-depth interviews with Gen Alpha. I'll be touching on that a little bit here, but we're still analyzing that data, especially next month in July. The third phase, I can't wait for it because we're going to spend time at amazing churches like yours and with amazing families to see how they're creatively loving and serving Gen Alpha. But in the midst of all those research phases, again, we try to take complexity and narrow it down to simplicity. So at this point, and hear me, we might change as we finish the next 40% of our research. But at this point, If we were asked to describe Gen Alpha in 3 words, it would be they are curious, they are cautious, and they are curators. Curious, cautious, and creators. Let's unpack that. This generation is curious about their world. When they have questions, they expect to be able to find, figure out, search for answers. See, when I was 16, you know how I found answers to questions? The encyclopedia, yes. Actual books in our library that our family happened to have. That was how I could look up rainfall in India, but I could not Google the kinds of questions and look at AI that this generation can. And because they're exposed to so much, they are curious about their world. They're curious about AI. They're curious about AI. Now, somebody close to AI has said, a thoughtful person's response to AI is both, oh, great, and oh, no. And I feel that way. Oh, great, and oh, no. And so does this generation. When it comes to the oh, great, 72%, now data's a little bit varied here, but one of the higher estimates is that 72% of teens have used an AI companion. If you've been on AI, you know that nobody affirms you like AI. I am brilliant, according to Claude. If you want a good sycophant, go to AI. They will affirm you. And so no wonder this generation, hungry for affirmation, hungry to be listened to, which we'll get to in a few minutes, is turning to AI. Because AI is offering something that the nearest adults and the nearest churches are not yet offering. Notice I said yet, because I believe we can get there. So they're curious about AI. They're curious about God. This generation is open to the divine. Some of us might remember the seeker movement in like the 80s and 90s, seeker-friendly, seeker-sensitive, when the idea was like, let's have church feel as much like a theater as possible. Let's have church feel like the rest of life. Not this generation. This generation, they don't want church to feel like theater. They want church to feel like temple. They want to worship God blatantly. And what we're seeing, especially on college campuses, especially on the South, this generation is gravitating toward exciting disciplines. They're doing spontaneous worship nights, repentance nights, water baptisms in campus fountains all over the country. A friend of mine who works on college campuses quite a bit, she actually has gotten a shoulder injury from all the water baptisms she's been doing with college students. It is awesome. So this generation is curious about God. And we see this in our Gen Alpha research. Over half of our sample are spiritually open. So we feel like the harvest field is ripe. We want to be the right kind of workers. So this generation is curious. This generation is cautious. Largely, probably because of the pandemic, because of our fractured world. They're staying home quite a bit. I mean, we have parents come to us and say, I'm actually concerned at how much my kid is at home. They have some social contact via phone, via devices, but they're home an awful lot. According to The Atlantic, go outside has been replaced with go online for our preschoolers, for our elementary age, and for our teenagers. So they're cautious about getting out of the house. While they're curious about AI, they're also cautious about AI. I had a 20-something lecture me for quite a while this weekend on the water usage of AI. She's not wrong. There are significant ethical concerns that we need to have with AI, and our young people are often leading the way in asking those questions about AI and justice. And they're cautious about religion. While they're curious about God, they're cautious about us as religious people. Maybe you've heard the question here in the U.S. in the last 18 months or so, are we in the middle of a youth revival? When we look at what's happening, again, especially on college campuses, especially in the South, but really nationwide, I'm on the board of InterVarsity, and every metric is year over year up, and Crew is seeing the same thing. So this question emerges, are we in the middle of a revival with our young people? I love what Ed Stetzer says. If you're wondering if you're in a revival, you're probably not in a revival. And actually, we would agree that if you really look at the data, while there's a lot of bright spots, we haven't quite crossed a threshold into revival when we look at religious attendance, when we look at religious behaviors, etc. But there's definitely something special happening. There's definitely bright spots that the Holy Spirit is doing in this next generation. And part of what we get to do as adults is overcome young people's caution. And we'll get to how we can do that in a few moments. So they're curious, they're cautious, they're curators of their identity, belonging, and purpose. And some other research that we've done at the Full Youth Institute, we think these are the three big questions that drive all of us, whatever age we are, but especially young people. Who am I? Where do I fit? And what difference can I make? And the way this generation is interacting with social media, it's not so much about what they project out, it's about what they select and what gets in their algorithm. It's much more about what they're curating, what they see and experience day to day in social media, than it is what they are posting. This is a switch from Gen Z to Gen Alpha. So they're curators of identity, belonging, and purpose, and then they're curators of belief. Drawing a little bit from here, and a little bit from here, and a little bit from here. According to our Gen Alpha research, social media is one of the top 3 places teens in our study learn about faith and spirituality, and it's the top for non-religious teens. So as we think about that mission field, some of us might want to think about, okay, what are we doing digitally to engage this generation? Because in our research, social media was the #1 place that non-religious teens were engaging with faith and religion. So I love asking this question with a group of sharp leaders like you all, and we won't take the time to discuss it, but I just want to do a hand raising. If you had to choose one of these adjectives, given the young people you know, which adjective would you choose? Would you choose, hey, if I only get to choose one, I'm going to go curious? Or would you say, if I only get to go choose one, I'm going to go cautious? Or maybe you'd say, I want to go curator. All right, so just want to do a little poll here, see where we land. How many would say, if I'm only choosing one, curious is the #1? Okay, if I'm only choosing one, cautious is the #1. If I'm only choosing one, curators is the #1. Interesting, okay. Yeah, you all skewed a little bit more to curators. Other groups, the few times I've done this before, have landed on cautious as #1. So I would love to hear if there's a few of you who raised your hand for curators, what makes you say, you know what, this is what I am most seeing with this gen. Oh, and Joe is walking around with a microphone. I don't think that's a coincidence. Oh, no, that was a phone. Sorry about that, Joe. Now Joe is running to get a microphone. So sorry about that, Joe. Yeah. All right. And I see somebody. Yeah, great. Joe is on his way back to you. So let's give Joe a hand. Way to go, Joe. Right. Yeah. What made you choose curators?
I think it's definitely just from, I worked in the school and then also I was a youth pastor for 4 years. You just see, and also online, you see this, they like this idea of Jesus. Of like this love, compassion, but they don't like the actual lordship of him.
Ah, yes.
And so they'll take these attributes of like, yes, Jesus loves me. Yes. Jesus is comforting me. Like you said, because unfortunately, the divorce rate is high and single parenthood is high. And so they're not getting that from mom or dad.
Yeah.
And so they're looking for the things that they like. But then when it actually comes to what it actually means to be a follower of Jesus, that's what they take from New Age or New Thought or whatever it is, where it's like, we like this Jesus as long as he's conform to what I want.
Yeah, warm and fuzzy Jesus is great. I was reading Matthew 10 this morning, and I'm going to be off on the quote, but basically, those of us who lose our lives save it. And a lot of young people, you're right, are not willing to lose their life wholeheartedly for the sake of Jesus. So thank you for naming that. Is there one other person who would like to share what made you choose curator? Just a curiosity. Okay. Say more. Got it. So just kind of wondering, yeah, they are piecing things together. It's very much a mosaic for young people. Well, I want you to keep these 3 adjectives in your mind: curious, cautious, and curating. As we do a little bit of a deeper dive into what I think is some of the most important insights for church leaders, ministry leaders to understand. So what are some of our key findings? I'm going to focus on 3. The first, and I got to say, if you wrestled me to the ground, hopefully you wouldn't feel the need to do that. But if you wrestled me to the ground and said, what's the most important thing you've seen so far with Gen Alpha? Honestly, it might be this one that I'm going to start with. And that is that family and home are absolutely central. Family and home are so meaningful to this generation. I mentioned our identity, belonging, and purpose framework, and we saw this with question after question we asked about this. Now, and this was also true for non-traditional families. 19% of our sample was a non-traditional sample. They also pegged family as highly influential. And we know that for a lot of young people, family is not a safe space. And so this is, again, an opportunity for the church. So I want us to keep that in mind. But again, when we ask questions about identity, who do you trust most to talk to when figuring out something about yourself? Look at family, number 1. Friends, number 2. No one. Youth and religious leaders came in 4th. Where do you most feel like yourself? When we gave young people the opportunity to select a couple answers, home came number 1, which we think is largely family. Again, ahead of friend, school, online, and church. What about belonging? Who most helps you feel like or remember that you belong? Again, family ahead of friends and religious leaders. Where do you most fit in or belong? Again, home, number 1, ahead of friend group, etc. Also purpose. And again, I'm only showing you a small fraction of the graphs that we could. Who do you trust most to talk about your future dreams and goals? Family, ahead of friends. Where do you most often find purpose? Home, again, connected with the family. And then lastly, we didn't just look at identity, belonging, and purpose with Gen Alpha. We also looked at faith. Who or what has influenced your spiritual beliefs the most? Hey, grandparents, take a look at this screen, because I think this is very exciting for grandparents. Parents, number 1, grandparents, number 2, ahead of friends and religious leaders. But even siblings, honestly, are pegging higher than I might have thought they would when young people can choose to. Where do you feel most comfortable practicing or exploring your faith or spirituality? Alone and at home. Alone, probably often at home, or at home with family. So here's how we describe it as researchers. We have long said, research has long indicated that it's hard to point to anything more influential in a young person's faith journey than their family. Take that with a grain of salt. We all know young people who have a very different faith than their family, and across the board. So take that with a lot of grains of salt. But if you just look at what tends to correlate with religious commitment and behavior, there really is nothing historically in the research that is more correlated than family. That's been true all along. What's different is this generation is verbalizing it themselves. They are realizing, they're aware of how important their family is. Now, we get asked, why is that? What is going on with this generation and family? Honestly, we don't know yet. It seems like for this generation, the circle of trust is smaller. Those who they really trust to speak into their life. Again, maybe because of the pandemic, maybe because of how fractured and divided and divisive our world is. So there's permeable boundaries where people might have some influence, but that circle of trust that really shapes me is smaller. I also think there's a parenting style these days that is contributing to some very exciting family intimacy and faith. And it's different than when I parented my kids, who are now 20, 23, and 25. Because when I was parenting my now young adult children, when they were in elementary, middle school, preschool, we never talked about emotional regulation. I wish we had. I have told all of our kids that I wish we had talked more about feelings in our family when the kids were growing up. But, we didn't have the feelings wheel. That's on refrigerators all over the country and in classrooms to help Gen Alpha and Gen Z to some degree, articulate which of these more and more granular adjectives are they feeling. And I think there's something really beautiful about this. Now, I'm also curious some of the disadvantages of parenting that's so focused on emotions, et cetera. And even just talking to our team members who have Gen Alpha kids, they're like, it's exhausting. Trying to pay attention to your own emotions, regulate those, also regulate your kids' emotions, et cetera. So there's certainly some downsides of this kind of style of parenting, gentle parenting. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a teacher in pre-kindergarten. She was over for dinner last night. We were talking about this, and she said, gentle parenting is really tough in the classroom because she has to deal with some of the behavioral issues that families are not quite addressing. So there's pluses and minuses about this parenting style. I'm not an expert on it at all, but I will just say as a parent myself, I am really glad, and I wish that I had made more space for emotions. I mean, I literally told my kids at times to pull it together. That was like a family mantra when they were being too sad or too mad. Pull it together. And I wish I had never, or at least said that a lot fewer times than I did to our kids. So with each of the main insights I want to share, I'm going to give you a key shift. Parents and home are not peripheral to formation. They are where formation is happening. So as we move into future phases, especially the third phase of research, and then we always create resources out of our research, we are eager to get parents direct resources, but then also we love it when the church is the hero with families. So we want to set you up to succeed with families. So we'll be offering resources for you to give to Gen Alpha parents and grandparents so that you can have that longer term relationship with them. Okay, if you were to ask me what's the second most important finding in our Gen Alpha research, I would probably go to this one. And it's what young people want from adults. Young people, Gen Alpha, they want adults who listen, but it's not any kind of listening. It's adults who listen and don't judge. It's not just listening, it's listening and journeying with instead of judging. It's listening and not pointing a finger. We asked, what makes an adult trustworthy? These are listed in rank order. Check out the first two. They listen without judging me. They respect my views, even if they disagree. The next two have to do with being consistent. They follow through on what they say. Their actions match their values. And then they know me well. This is what this generation is wanting in us and in your congregants from adults. Let's get even more specific. What could faith communities do more of to connect better with teens? Look at number one, be more welcoming and less judgmental. Listen to young people's questions. Talk openly about tough issues. Those were the three shifts that our sample of over 3,000 13 to 17-year-olds, half of whom were Christian, half of whom were from other faiths or non-religious. That's what they said faith communities could do more of. I've been trying to implement this research even more with my young adult kids. And I really believe in the power of questions. So as a parent, I ask my kids a lot of questions. One of our mantras is never make a statement if you can ask a question instead. For leadership and family, never make a statement if you can ask a question instead. But here's what I've been convicted of this last month, that a lot of the questions I ask of our young adult kids, they're questions with an agenda. They're questions not because I'm curious, but because I'm hoping to convince them of something, hoping to lead them to a particular spot. Or as my kids will sometimes refer to it when they often, almost always catch on, they're questions. But out of our research, I've been trying to filter those kinds of questions and really just ask, what are you excited about in your faith these days? When do you feel closest to God? Not because I'm trying to convince them of something, but because they are amazing people that I want to understand and journey with. So this research is shaping my own parenting. Here's what one young person said. Again, some of the interviews, we've started the process of the 100. Church leaders should engage more with young people, be active, open, and approachable. They should talk with us, not down to us. When we ask young people to describe your ideal mentor, it's showing up. Someone who expresses that they want to spend time with you and actually then does spend time with you. So our lives back up this desire we say we have to spend time with them. Someone who sets aside time for us, goes and does something with us, checks in and remembers what's going on in your life. Sometimes we need to create systems to remember what's going on in young people's lives. AKA like write it down or put it in your calendar so you can ask a week later, hey, been praying for you, how's it going? We don't have to rely on our own memories for that. Listening and showing up. She just listens and it's really great. You can tell she really understands. Whew, this next one's convicting. She doesn't try to change my mindset. She helps me see things from different perspectives. Someone who listens to you talk about things and then responds with wisdom. Someone who talks from their experience and says, hey, you're not alone. I've gone through this too. What I love is that here we're turning a corner from just listening to perhaps offering your own perspective. And out of our research, again, especially with my own 3 young adult kids, but also other young adults, I have found it very helpful that in those times when I don't feel like it's just about listening, but I am supposed to offer some advice, some perspective, a concern that I have. When I offer that to my kids, I will then say to them, so tell me, what do you disagree with in what I just said? My kids love critiquing me. And I give them the opportunity to do that. I've shared something that I'm wondering about in your life or thinking about for your life or your relationships, whatever it might be. What do you disagree with? And I let them start by critiquing me. And then when I say, just curious, what might you agree with in what I said? I think they're a lot more willing to talk about what they agree with because I've led with giving them the chance to critique me as a parent. So even when we offer wisdom, advice, perspective, how do we do so in a way that's still a dialogue and still lets us wrestle? You see, with this generation, here's the key shift. Distrust is the baseline. That's the given. They don't start, the default is no longer trust. The default is distrust. And so the good news, though, about trust is it's not earned by any heroic gesture. It's earned by asking, how can I pray for you? Sending a text that's saying, hey, I'm praying for you. And asking 3 days later, hey, how did that go? How did God work? Trust is built through everyday acts of building relationships, being consistent, listening, and withholding judgment. So, we've talked about Gen Alpha, curious, cautious curators, very affected by family, which gives us, I think, a great opportunity to partner with parents, step-parents, caregivers, guardians, grandparents as pastors. We can help our adults rebuild or build trust with this generation by the way that we listen. And then lastly, I want to loop back to something I touched on earlier. Who and what is really shaping their faith? And there's some nuanced findings here. Hybrid teens practice hybrid spirituality. So just like a lot happening with young people, there's an in-person and a digital aspect to it. That's just more and more their norm. The two of those things are going hand in hand. A quarter of those in our sample say, my faith has changed because of things I've learned or people I've met online. 1/3 have said, I learn about faith or spiritual topics online more than in person. I touched on this earlier, but just so you really see it clearly, Christians, top 3 place, Christian 13 to 17-year-olds in our sample are learning about faith and spirituality. Church, home, and then social media was number 3. For those in our sample who are nuns, who don't profess any religious affiliation, social media is actually the number 1 place. It goes back to what you said, sir, about curating different aspects of faith. While that's true, what about deep transformation? This is getting information. What about formation? Online might be information. What about formation? When we spend time asking those questions, how have you really been transformed? We hear about adults. We hear about relationship. So what it seems like, part of how we're framing it now, and give us freedom to maybe shift a little bit, but at least what I would say now is that spiritual curiosity can be met online, but spiritual transformation happens through relationship. So what we have always believed in with relational discipleship, going and making disciples, of course, making disciples being the key verb in the Great Commission, that is all the more important, even in the midst of the digital soup that young people are swimming in. So here's the key shift. Yes, the digital world is shaping young people's faith. Let's make youth group and church and adult relationships worth leaving home for, because they feel so cared and known and supported by us. I said that I wanted to give you all the data here. If you use this QR code, you'll get all the data in our free Gen Alpha research report. So I want to make sure you have that information. And I think now we have about 10 minutes for Q&A, the beloved pre-lunch Q&A time. So would love to know what you're thinking, anything I can clarify. And I will be back tonight, so we'll be talking more together tonight.
With our kids learning so much online, what would you recommend for helping protect them online?
Great question. I think one of the most exciting books in the U.S. in the last 3 years, outside of the Bible, would be The Anxious Generation. How many of you read The Anxious Generation by John Haidt? It casts light on, he is not a Christian in his faith. It casts light on what technology is doing with young people. A lot of great things about technology, but a lot of real challenges. And what's been exciting is that book is generating shifts in schools, even in legislation. I mean, more and more schools. So when the book first came out, and one of its recommendations was, schools should lock up cell phones, especially high school, middle school, whether it's every period or for the whole day. And I read that and I thought, no school's ever going to do that. That is a bridge too far. I was totally wrong. More and more private and public high schools and middle schools are locking up phones. Other countries are exploring legislation that would delay the age at which young people can engage with social media. In the U.S., if you really read the terms of social media apps, it's 13. So that when parents ask, what's the earliest that our kids should be involved in social media, I start by saying no earlier than 13. That's what those who made the app say. And if your kid is involved younger than that, then they're lying to get access to that app. And I don't think that's something we want to encourage. So no earlier than 13. What some countries are exploring, I don't think it's gotten much momentum in the US yet, but it would be 16 before young people would be able to explore social media. So I would say, read that book, and then the communities where the most progress is made is when it's a community supporting each other. So it's a community talking to the school, a number of families, a number of churches coming to schools and say, hey, what can we do? And if that's not possible to do like systemically with churches and families, with churches and schools, then, hey, what other families do you know? Are there 2 or 3 or 4 other families where you can say together, hey, we're not going to do social media until X, or we're certainly going to be in touch with each other about what phone we're going to give by when, et cetera. So just in the last 2 years, I'm seeing some really exciting movement away from social media. More young people are going grayscale on their phones. Grayscale. So instead of seeing social media and everything in color, they choose grayscale because they know it will be less appealing and addictive to them when it's grayscale, all black and white and shades of gray instead of color. This is happening more and more with young people. So I think there's an exciting kind of healthy counter-reaction to how much we immersed ourselves in phones and social media. And that's all the more reason why with AI coming, like we need to be even more proactive about that. So did I answer your question, or do you have any follow-up? Totally, it's big. And so that's where, like, on the smallest level, like what are 2 other families that you could make a commitment to handle technology similarly with? So when your kid tells you, no one blank or everybody blank, not true. We're in covenant with these 2 other families, hopefully some of whom are your kids' close friends. So yeah, great.
I had a question in regards to practicing your faith at youth group or the church. The church was a much higher scale. So what is the differentiation between those 2 experiences that youth groups should take into account and be more like the church rather than just youth groups?
Yeah, I'm kind of glad you asked that question. And here's why I'm only kind of glad you asked that question. I said it kind of quickly, but if you looked at those graphs and when you get the free report, you will see how low youth group is ranked. And we're struggling with that as researchers because the last thing we want to do is discourage hardworking youth leaders. So honestly, we're trying to figure out how to talk about that. So that's why I'm only kind of glad that you asked this question, because we're still figuring out how do we talk about that? How do we affirm how God is working while still share? And yet, I mean, there were some of those graphs where youth leaders were behind no one and where they're going for identity, belonging, and purpose. So we have a meeting as the second week of July to process that very question. So stay tuned. But I think you did point out something that there was, when it talked about where Christian young people are learning, church was actually ahead of home, while youth group adults might be low, church was high. And that, again, I think is because a lot of youth groups, and we're going to talk about this tonight, a lot of youth groups are very segregated. And that's not a verb I use lightly. It's the young people over here and not interacting with the adults. And what young people want is they don't always act like it, but they want to be in relationship with adults. So I'll say especially young adults. A lot of churches are seeing surges in young adults being engaged these days, even ahead of teenagers. And so what a lot of churches do in response is basically create youth group 2.0 for young adults and give them like their own meeting on Friday nights. And then those churches end up disappointed when not many adults show up. And when we stop and ask those churches, well, did you talk to the young adults about what they wanted? Often what young adults want is they want mentoring from adults. Like, sure, they want a little bit of time on their own, but they really want to be part of the overall church. So my kind of long, winding answer to your question is I do think many churches offer the intergenerational relationships that young people ultimately crave when they trust the adults. We got to cross that line of trust. So thank you kind of for asking that question. So, yeah.
I do find that there's a lot of non-committal nature of students. What we call that is the fear of better options.
Yep.
And so that, especially with what you're sharing, that they're, home and other things are kind of more of a priority. Maybe just speak into how you would combat that to, make it. I don't know. Just what would you say to that, and how to, make that incorporated into the youth group somehow?
Yeah, so I just alluded to it. Great question. I just alluded to it in my last answer. But, by the way, I thought the advice given up here on the platform in the few minutes before the break was just excellent advice on how to bring about change in a church. One of the things that we talk about quite a bit is we got to listen to young people. And so, for that you're wondering, how do I connect with young people? Have we asked them? Are we spending time with young people once a month as senior leaders? Just understanding what they're excited about, what they're scared about, what they're wrestling with, what they think about politics, what they think about sexuality, what they think about the environment, etc. Young people want to be listened to. And so that is usually our first recommendation to churches. Don't plan anything other than plan how you're going to listen to young people. Because every church is different, every church's young people is different, etc. So honestly, that is the starting point. And then back to his question, how do we build adult relationships based on that listening? So, thanks. Are we recording? Does she need to do it in the mic? Okay, it's almost here anyway. Perfect.
Okay, so we were looking into some curriculum which brought the thought, have you done any research connecting, I've seen some really fabulous social media for other churches about, where the kids seem to be engaged with the social media.
Yeah.
We're really new to that.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if there's research in correlation with active youth participation and the social media and, their kind of faith walk.
Great question. I don't have research to that question. You asked about research, and I always try to be clear when I have research versus when I just have observation. But I have observed exactly what you're saying, that in the spirit of young people being curators and also using social media, like young people are posting some really interesting things about faith. Just yesterday, I saw something from a church in Florida that was calling it From Pizza to Pews. And it was a young adult ministry, and it was young adults who were posting it, and I think they were leading this themselves. They met for pizza, and then they went to church that night. And they had this whole social media Pizza to Pews campaign. So that was just what I saw yesterday. So I am observing the same thing, that whether it's a 14-year-old or a 24-year-old, they have so much to learn, so much we can learn when it comes to how to engage with media. So thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more, or are we wrapping?
I think,
Okay, here we go. One more.
I just have a quick question. I think you mentioned family as a really important influence. And what we've heard from some young people is that family always comes up, right? Issues around family. How have you guys seen engagement with family? How do we do that better, right? Because if there's a sports, something happening, then the commitment is lacking.
Yeah. Well, you're the first church I've heard of where sports competes with church involvement, so I can't relate to that at all. Yeah, so, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, but a lot of what we encourage churches to do, and we get into this in Future Focused Church, so I'm so glad you all got a copy of this, is to listen to families. What are they concerned about? And instead of offering ministry and program that isn't all that relevant, how do we give them an on-ramp for community that is relevant? How do we help them navigate technology? How do we help them navigate sexuality? How do we help them navigate mental health? Those are three of the questions that we get the most from parents: technology, sexuality, and mental health. So how can the church be a safe place that parents can start having those conversations and then, like all of us, come to deeper and deeper commitment of what it means to prioritize faith? So, yeah, great question. Thanks.